second code is R79. I repeat, R79.
Okay, thank you, Evan. One of the things I was talking about earlier on was the technique of taking a look at the charge first and then working it through into the summation. And I think you saw a good example of this. Evan had actually spoken to the jurors once again about the promises made on jury selection, but if you notice in his jury selection he actually broke down all of the different items of damages so that he could then call on the promises that were made and reflect on those promises and then make sure that he has them so that he can get the verdict that he needs for the client. And he had worked that well all the way throughout. The righteous indignation that you saw Evan use, the way that he started this out, again, I'm going to speak to you not from the heart, but from the head. And in fact, what happens by the end of this? He's reversed that. Of course, you saw that. But the bottom line is, what he's done is he's actually presented the foundation for the damages by explaining the case in his way. One of the things that we try and do throughout the trial is this. There are different ways, different approaches when lawyers sometimes thank the jurors at first, other lawyers don't thank them at first, but there are techniques that you can use. And what I want to try and do right now in the last summation that you'll hear tonight is share with you some other techniques that you can use. And one of the techniques that you can use is by taking something that your adversary said, something that you weren't even thinking about doing because you prepared your summation already, taking their words, turning them and using them against them, and also the technique that we call cross-examining the empty chair during summation. Because what you can do is you can play back to the minds of the jurors that which took place during the trial and highlight the most important things that you were really talking about. And it's a very powerful way of doing it. The other thing, of course, is to draw analogies with telling them a story that you want them to repeat in the jury room. And if you can develop the anger from what happened on liability, for example, or if somebody told less than the truth, and then work that anger right into the damages, look at how much more powerful it is. So let me go right into the summation. This is a case, I recently had the opportunity to argue this case in the Appellate Division, First Department, on a verdict that I had taken about a year and a half ago involving a bus and a pedestrian. There's not going to be a thank you when I start this. I just want you to see the way that it works. Ladies and gentlemen, you now know that a 46-year-old woman was returning home from work. She had worked a long, hard day as a maid, cleaning someone's house out in Douglaston, New York, and she got on a train back the Long Island Railroad back into Manhattan, and she was going home. And she was going to see her husband and her 9-year-old daughter and her 20-year-old son. And she was looking forward to this because when she'd finished the day working, her husband was making her dinner. And she had walked all the way up 1.5 blocks from her apartment when an accident took place. What Gloria Aguilar could never have imagined as she started to cross a street, and you all know the street now, as she started to cross the street, what she couldn't have imagined was that would be the last day that she ever walked with 2 legs. What she couldn't have imagined is that would be the last day that she would ever live pain-free. And what she certainly couldn't have imagined is the horrors that she would face for the rest of her life. But those are the realities with which she now has to deal, with which she now has to live, and with which she has to live her life for the rest of her life. I listened very closely to what my adversary had to say, Mr. Woodruff. He's a wonderful lawyer. He's excellent. I'm sure you know that by now. And if you notice, there wasn't one objection when he spoke. I let him say whatever he had to say to you without objection, because he now knows, of course, that this is the time when we get to sum up to you, a time when there shouldn't be interruption, a time when we have an opportunity to speak with you clearly so that no one interrupts and you could hear exactly what we said. Well, he said something that was terribly important. And the words that he used, I think, ring true, no matter what happened in this case. But here's what he said. The words he chose to use for you were, and I'm quoting him, he just used this a few moments ago, garbage in, garbage out. That's what he said. Garbage in, garbage out, referring to the way that we presented this case. If you think that we presented a case that should be thrown out of court, throw us out of court. We don't deserve any verdict in our favor. But let's take a look at what happened. Of course, you remember the 2 Transit Authority investigators that testified. When I had another witness on the stand, 2 investigators were sitting out in the hall, Mr. Randall and Miss Catania. And I asked Mr. Randall, when he testified, you were sitting out in the hall, weren't you? Yes. You were sitting out at the hall with Miss Catania, weren't you? Yes. Certainly you spoke with her, didn't you? And his answer was, yes, I spoke with her. Well, did you speak about the case? No. Did you speak about the facts of the case? No. Did you speak about the facts of the case from the day of the accident right up to the time that you were sitting in the hall? No. Not once? Not once is what he said to you. Not once. I know some of you thought these were throwaway questions, but then I questioned Miss Catania when she took the stand. You were out in the hallway for an hour and a half with Mr. Randall. Yes. Of course you spoke about the case, didn't you? Sure. Of course, when you spoke about the case, you went into the facts, didn't you? Yes. And you even anticipated some of the questions that I might ask. Yeah, we tried to. And that's what you spoke about for that hour and a half, right? Yes. Garbage in, garbage out is what Mr. Woodruff tells you? He has the audacity to use those words? When in fact, we know that if anyone was telling less than the truth, it was the Transit Authority's investigators. And then they tell you, believe the reports that we've written. And then they bring in an expert witness, Mark Marpet. Mark Marpet is going to tell you how this accident occurred. He is the accident reconstructionist of accident reconstructionists. And he comes into this courthouse. Were you surprised to learn how much money he made from the Transit Authority? Were you surprised to learn that he never once testified against the Transit Authority? Did it shock you when you learned that he made over $1 million from the Transit Authority? And then when I questioned him about what he does for a living, outside of testifying for the Transit Authority, of course, he said, I teach at St. John's. Well, sir, do you teach engineering? No. Do you teach accident reconstruction? No. Of course I knew the answers to this. Let's see, you teach statistics, don't you? Yes. Having nothing to do with accident reconstruction. Well, in a way, sir, did you ever once teach accident reconstruction? Not once. That's what he said from the stand. But it got worse than that. Here's what Mark Marpet did. He showed you how the accident happened. Do you remember what he said to the judge when he was asked the question, how did this accident unfold? He said, Judge, may I step down in front of the jury? And the judge said, please, go ahead. And he stepped down and he got down on the ground right in front of you. You had to stand up to see him, and when you stood up, my heart sank because you were paying attention to this man. And here's what he said. He said, we know how the accident happened because we know that the wheel rolled over her foot, crushing her foot, and then it came up the tibia, and he explained how it crushed her in this way, in a longitudinal way. And he was able to pinpoint how the accident happened. And in fact, this was the exhibit that he used. Well, this is a bloodline showing a tire track. And that's not just blood, that's human matter, that's Gloria Aguilar's body, parts of her body, on that bloodline. And from this, he was able to tell you that the accident couldn't have occurred in the crosswalk. As we said, it had to occur in a different location. And he knew, as he told you, he knew from the way that the wheel had crushed her leg exactly what happened. And you were all listening to him, standing up in your chairs, bent over to look at him while he's laying on the floor, crawling on the floor. I couldn't believe what he said. The one thing he had never looked at was the hospital chart. I get the opportunity to cross-examine him. Mr. Marpet, not Dr. Marpet, Mr. Marpet. Sir, would you agree with me it would be inappropriate to tell this jury less than the truth? Yes. Would you agree with me it would be wrong to make up facts? Yes. Would you agree with me that if you were to do something like that, your testimony would hold no weight whatsoever? I didn't do that, sir. It's not my question. My question is, would you agree with me it would be wrong to tell the jurors something that never happened? Of course. Let's take a look at the hospital records together. Let's take a look at the radiology report, sir. All right? When you say that her foot was crushed, the wheel went over it. Yes. 40,000 pounds of weight went over her leg. Yes, but not just her leg, her foot. Yes. So that it was crushed. Yes. Sir, let's take a look at the radiology report. Left leg. It says left leg intact. You see this word? Intact. Take a look at it, ladies and gentlemen. Intact. Oh, that's a mistake. Your opinion was a mistake. Well, I made a mistake on that. Well, let's continue. Comes to her ankle. Ankle intact. Yes. And then we see that there's a mid-shaft fracture where the shaft of the tibia was actually crushed. from where I'm pointing right now, mid-shaft, up to the knee. About 8 inches? Yes. How wide is the wheel, sir? About 8 inches. And now we know that it wasn't a longitudinal crushing the way that you say, it was transverse. Well, yes, I made a mistake on that, but it doesn't change my opinion. It doesn't change his opinion. This man is rolling around the floor, telling you how the accident happened, when he didn't even take the time to look at those records. Garbage in, garbage out? Is Mr. Woodruff kidding to present a witness like this? And then he comes forward and says, there's something else you need to know. Women in New York City walk faster than women in the rest of the country. That's what he said to you. And he actually had an article to support his opinion. Did he not think that I would take a look at the article? So I read the article. And now I get to cross-examine him. Sir, you cited an article to the jury, yes, that women in New York City walk faster. Why is it so important that women walk faster? Because that would mean she'd be out in the street for less amount of time. The bus wouldn't have had the opportunity to see her. But if she walks slower, okay. So what happens? I point out to him, let's take a look at the article together. How fast is it that you're saying women in New York City walk? 6 feet per second is what he said. 6 feet per second. People don't jog the New York City Marathon in 6 feet per second, but that's what he's saying she's walking when she's crossing the street. And sure enough, the Manual for Uniform Traffic Control Devices, which the judge has allowed in evidence, says women walk at 3.5 to 4 feet per second, but he's changed that around. He wants it much faster than that, almost double, because it would give the bus driver less time to see her. Obviously more time. She did nothing wrong. And then I asked him about the article. Sir, let's take a look at the article together. You have it right there in your loosely folder. Yes, I do. Show us where it says one word about women in New York City walking faster. He says, right here. I said, good, show me. And he starts flipping through the article. And he starts flipping through a little faster. And he keeps trying to find it. I said, sir, try all you like. It's not there, is it? He goes, it's just a mistake. It's just a mistake. So now we have another mistake that Mr. Marpet made. In fact, it says women in Buffalo and women in Maryland walk slightly faster than others, but not one word about women in New York City, yet he swore to tell the truth and swore that women in New York City walk faster. What in the world is going on, ladies and gentlemen? He's made a number of mistakes. He's creating facts. Why in the world is the Transit Authority trying so hard to deny justice to Gloria Aguilar? Why are they doing that? Why is that appropriate? Why would anyone ever accept something like this? Ladies and gentlemen, let me back off for just a moment. I want to tell you a story. And the story is this. There was a couple, an elderly couple. They were going out for their anniversary dinner. And they had waited a long time to be able to afford to have this anniversary dinner. And they were going to one of the best restaurants in town. And they went to the restaurant and they ordered the specialty of the house. And the specialty of the house was beef stew. And they couldn't wait to try it. They had heard so much about it for years, but never had the money to try it. And now they did. And the husband tried it, and the beef tasted a little funny to him. It was a little off. And the wife tasted the beef and said, you know what? That beef is rancid. And they called over the waiter, and they said, you know, the beef in this beef stew is rancid. And the waiter said, well, just pick around the beef. The rest of it's really good. And sure enough, the couple got out and walked out of that restaurant, never came back. They threw the beef stew out. Well, you know what you can do with Marpet's testimony? You can throw it right out, because you don't have to pick around the facts that he made mistakes with, the facts that never existed, the facts that he created. That's what's going on here. And sure enough, when we take a look at the Transit Authority's own records, look at this exhibit that we have. It says the bus driver at impact was driving at 5 miles an hour. Well, I asked the bus driver during, you heard it, 2.5 days of cross-examination. I admit it was a long time. But during that time, I asked him, do you know how fast you were driving at impact? And his answer was, I don't know. Did you ever tell anyone how fast you were driving at impact? No, I didn't know. Well, after the accident, did you tell someone how fast you were driving? No, I didn't know. I can't say. And then I asked the surface line dispatcher, the 5 miles an hour. I want you to listen to this testimony. I read back the testimony of the defendant driver. And sure enough, he said, oh, well, I suppose we weren't following protocol. I said, excuse me? He said, protocol was lost. Those are his words. Protocol was lost. I'm quoting from the trial transcript. Protocol was lost. You know what was lost in this case? Gloria Aguilar's leg was lost in this case, and the Transit Authority is trying to deny justice, and they still want to deny justice, and it's time for Gloria Aguilar to get justice, because what happened here never should have happened. So look what takes place. She's laying in the street. Her leg has been almost completely removed. She's screaming. Her family is a block and a half away. They hear the sirens of the police and the fire department. A call goes out to them, and they come running to the scene. They see their mother, they see their husband, right there, the wife right there, sure enough, laying in the street, emergency personnel working on her. And she says this, "Please, I know I'm dying, take care of my children." That's what her concern was, her children. Not about herself. That's not what she was concerned about at that point in time. They take her to Bellevue Hospital. She'd asked to go to Roosevelt. They said, "No, we have to take you to Bellevue, to a level 1 trauma center." And when she gets there, what they say to her is, "Gloria, we have to remove your left leg." And she says in her broken English, you know she speaks only Spanish, we had an interpreter, she says, "Don't you do that to me. Don't you do that to me." And sure enough, when she woke up from the anesthesia, her leg was gone. Gloria Aguilar tried to be strong in the hospital. As time went by, she smelled something from her leg, and she knew that something was wrong, and she told the nurses at Bellevue that something was wrong, that she smelled something that shouldn't have been there. And the nurses says, "Don't worry about it." And sure enough, she said, "I need to see a doctor." And she's trying to communicate in her broken English that she needed to see a doctor. And finally, the doctor came after days, and a necrosis had taken place, death of tissue, an infection had set in, the worst type of infection, an osteomyelitic infection, and you heard all about that from the orthopedist that we called. And sure enough, we know what happened. They had to go in and convert from a below-the-knee amputation to an above-the-knee amputation. No small matter for Gloria Aguilar. And then you heard what she's been through afterwards. And she learned something that she had never even thought about, never even considered in her life before this accident. Because when she left Bellevue Hospital, she saw prejudice rear its ugly head, not for race, religion, creed, or color, but for something very different. Her husband tried to flag a cab when they left to take her home. And as soon as she wheeled up in her wheelchair, the cab drove away. Her husband actually tried to flag another cab by hiding her because it was raining. And as soon as the cab stopped, he ran and got her, pushed the wheelchair up, and the cab drove away. That's what she's left with. That's what's going on in her life. That's the suffering that she has to deal with. The fact that she goes home and she can't move. You heard how she can't even sit on the toilet without having somebody help her because she suffered a degloving injury to the other ankle. Degloving, just like a glove is peeled off of your hand, well, the skin was peeled off of her leg there, and she couldn't put weight on that ankle. So she couldn't balance herself on the toilet, and her husband had to wipe her, and the humiliation of having her son, a 20-year-old son, having to hold her or wipe her like she was a baby. Ladies and gentlemen, for Gloria Aguilar, this was no small event. When she tried to use the prosthesis, which she needs to use, you heard how the plastic actually comes in and cuts into her vaginal area, into her labia, into the vaginal lips, and how it's sore there, and how from the day of the accident to the present, she's never even been able to engage in sexual relations with her husband. She can't, and how she's always in pain. When you think about what happened, I presented testimony to you, and I was trying to be scrupulously fair concerning the injuries that she had suffered and the medical needs that she would have. And for example, you know it was uncontradicted that she needs physical therapy 3 times a week for 5 years. But I asked the economist, although she needs physical therapy at 3 times a week for 5 years, I want you in your calculation for the future projections to allow for only 1 time a week. And although she needs medications, for example, amitriptyline, 10 times per week, I want you to allow only 10 times per month. How much more fair could I be than that? Yet it's unfair to Gloria Aguilar. But the number you saw from The Economist when we put all of the medical needs together and all of the costs came out to $5,690,000. That was a minimum that was an unrealistic minimum because we proved much more than that. And you know, the defense had its own orthopedist. They didn't call the orthopedist. They had their own life care planner. They didn't call their life care planner. Why? Why did they choose not to bring them in? Because they knew if they called the life care planner, they would have put up higher numbers than I put up. And they didn't want you to see them. They just wanted to argue, garbage in, garbage out. Well, you know where the garbage is in this case? Of course you do now. It's with what they chose not to do by not bringing in the doctors that they were trying to prevent you from learning what their opinions were. Ladies and gentlemen, what happened to Gloria Aguilar never should have happened. The suffering that she has been through is great, and the suffering that she will be through in the future is even greater. 32.6 years. That's what she has to live. That's what the actuarial tables say. Will she live more or less? We don't know, but isn't she at least entitled to what the tables say? Of course. What she has been through for the past 5 years, is $5 million for her pain and suffering reasonable? Of course. And for 32.6 years, if I said at least another $5 million, wouldn't that be reasonable? Of course. But what about her husband, Aristides Aguilar, who has been taking care of her, who has been wiping her, who has been holding her, helping her, trying to get her through the days? Would $1 million for what he has been through for 5 years be too much? Of course not. And for his future damages, at least another $1 million. Ladies and gentlemen, we tried to present this case honestly to you, and we tried to present it in such a way that you would see exactly what had happened. The Transit Authority says this is Gloria Aguilar's fault. Not at all. When it comes to percentages of fault, the Transit Authority would be dancing in the street if you found 5% of fault against Gloria Aguilar. She's not 1% at fault. She did nothing to cause this accident. They're fully at fault. And when you take a look at their records and what they've done in putting down facts that never existed and calling a witness like Marpet and calling other witnesses, one speaks about speaking to a witness, another doesn't, when do we say, when does the nonsense stop? Well, it has to stop, and it has to stop now. Ladies and gentlemen, what we're saying is this. We have never asked for sympathy. And for the Transit Authority, we say this, no discounts for them. They don't get a discount on having percentages off. That's not fair either. What we're saying to you is, you have the ability to do something that no one else can do. You have the ability to render justice, and all we will ever ask for in this case is 100% justice. Thank you. Okay, thank you all. Any questions? Thank you for coming.